Okay. So in 2012, I was in Myanmar for the second time. I was there about 30 years ago, only to what was then Rangoon, because the security was so tight that that's all you could get to go to was Rangoon, and it was very interesting. But this time, I was just there for a few days and went to what is now Yangon, which used to be Rangoon, and Bagan, which is very interesting. I know there are people here like the goldsmiths who went down the Irrawaddy River to Mandalay. Anybody else has been to Mandalay or down the river? And maybe we can persuade the goldsmiths to show their video sometime. We tried to see if we could merge the two, but I have got a lot of slides here. So it's interesting to see what it looks like in those two places. You saw a lot of Yangon from that young woman who was telling you what it cost to live there, in case anybody was interested in living there. I think it would be very interesting myself. I would love to do that. And Bagan has turned into quite a tourist place, so here we go. Oh, why are we starting with that? So there's a map of, I don't have my pointer, but you see Rangoon at the bottom, or Yangon, and the Irrawaddy River goes to Mandalay, which is at the top. And Bagan is somewhere, I don't see it. Okay. So you can see that it's surrounded by China, and you saw how China sort of infiltrated that border town so that they could gamble there. And Laos, and India, and Bangladesh, and Cambodia, and Thailand. So all very interesting influences. It's amazing that Myanmar keeps any kind of integrity because there's so many influences so close by. They have about 100 ethnic groups, and many of them come from those neighboring countries. So the Burmization of certain ethnic minorities is happening. You don't see this kind of costume too much anymore. And these ethnic minorities are not the ones that we hear so much about, the Rohingya. So the three river systems are divided by mountain chains, which are the rivers Irrawaddy, the Salim, and the Sitang rivers. And again, you can see that on this map on the right. The Irrawaddy River is Myanmar's longest river, and fertile plains exist in the valleys between the mountain chains. The majority of Myanmar's population lives in the Irrawaddy Valley, of course, because it's more fertile. You notice this guide has this sort of yellow stuff on her face, which we saw very commonly. Anybody know what that is? She said it was like a suntan lotion. I don't know, but it was very common and seemed to be beauty enhancing. So Myanmar is divided into 7 states and 7 regions. The regions are predominantly Myanmar, that is the predominant ethnic group. So when it used to be called Burma, some people objected because it sounded like it was only for the Bamar tribe. And that's presumably why they changed the name to Myanmar. I'm not sure what Myanmar means, but it takes it out of that ethnic context. And the states are regions that are home to particular ethnic minorities, like the Rohingya. So Myanmar was long considered a pariah state while under the rule of an oppressive military junta from 1962 to 2011. I think I was there in about 1965, and it was very strictly ruled. Though it was interesting that there were still residual vestiges of the British. So there were old British hotels in Rangoon that you could stay at and order your gin and tonic. So we stayed in, actually, this is going back now to those days, but it was interesting because we were on our way to India. And there was a big typhoon in the, what would it be, Bay of Bengal, whatever you have to cross to go from Burma to India. So we couldn't cross it because it was a huge typhoon, so we had an extra couple of days in Burma. So the first time we stayed in a nice old British hotel with, seemed very colonial. But the second time they put us up at a Russian hotel. And the Russians had some degree of influence there in Burma. Well, it did become a socialist state, so they would. And it was a huge hotel with huge corridors, tall doors, tall doorknobs, and air conditioning because it's very hot there. And it must have cost a fortune to keep this hotel air conditioned. There were not very many people in there. My daughter, who was 13 at the time, thought that the Burmese must be a very tall people because of these enormous doors and hallways and doorknobs. I think it must have been the Russian design, I don't know. Anyway, the generals who ran the country suppressed almost all dissent and stood accused of gross human rights abuses, prompting international condemnation and sanctions. So gradual liberalization began in 2010, leading to free elections in 2015. That was after I was there. And the installation of a government led by a veteran opposition leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, in the following year. And as you know, she won a Nobel Peace Prize for her opposition to the junta there. But now, of course, she's not in favor because she's not doing anything to stop the abuse of the Rohingyas. So an army operation against alleged terrorists in the Rakhine state, that's where the Rohingyas are, since August 17, 2017, has driven more than 500,000 Muslim Rohingyas to flee to neighboring Bangladesh, which is all that Bangladesh needs. They're a very poor country anyway, in what the United Nations called a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Of course, the Myanmar people say it's not ethnic cleansing, but it certainly has every appearance of ethnic cleansing. So Burmese is the major language, and there are several minority languages. Buddhism is the major religion, and of course the Rohingyas are Muslim. And it's a surprise to most people who are familiar with Buddhism that the Buddhists would be so violent and commit such atrocities against another people. And it's not clear to me how that happens. The life expectancy is 64 years for men and 69 for women, which is pretty good. So Rangoon, or Yangon, is the country's largest city and is home to markets and parks and lakes. And you saw from that young woman's walking down the streets that it has nightlife, has lots of shopping, it has modern apartments, old apartments. I think it would be a fun city to live in for a while. And the university, of course, is there too. So Myanmar rates as a corrupt nation on the Corruption Perception Index with a rank of 136 out of 176 countries. It's only recently that it's been open to tourism, which I think everybody anticipated that it would make it less corrupt, and it's not clear that it is. And you can see there's streets and skyscrapers and parks, balloons. These are the old apartments. So Myanmar is one of the poorest nations in Southeast Asia, and that's saying a lot considering the neighbors it has, suffering from decades of stagnation, mismanagement, and isolation. The lack of an educated workforce skilled in modern technology hinders Myanmar's economy. The major agricultural product is rice, which covers about 60% of the country total cultivated land area. There are universities there, and I don't know how easy or hard it is to go there or how good or not they are. Even though you see church here, most Burmese are Buddhists. There's one of these statues. The sarong is a very popular and comfortable thing to wear, worn by both men and women. This is downtown market. People are very attractive, and I was impressed that they were very nice when I first went there. It seems like they've had to fight to survive, and they didn't seem quite as gentle and pleasant as when I remember them. Here's an alligator. Some of their musical instruments. Pretty modern shop selling sarongs. Now here's a store selling very fancy high-heeled shoes. In my short time in Burma, I wouldn't wear high-heel shoes anyway, but I certainly wouldn't wear these shoes to trek around the Burma that I saw. But somebody's wearing them, I guess. Berries? Maybe. There's anybody know what this is? The durian, yes. And the durian, when you open it, smells horrible and tastes wonderful. How many of you had durian? I can't see. Yes. Yeah. I love it, actually. The texture is like velvet. It's delicious. And durian ice cream doesn't have the smell. It's very nice. You can't take a durian into a hotel in Thailand and probably in Burma, because once it's open, the smell goes through the air conditioning system. Someone said it's like eating ambrosia in a toilet, so that gives you some idea. There's the president. At least he was president when I was there in 2012, and was an ally of Aung San Suu Kyi, which it wasn't easy to be, so he was pretty heroic being her ally. This is a lot more than you may want to know, but it's very interesting, this whole political situation with Rohingyas. So the Rohingya people have constantly faced human rights abuses by the Burmese regime that has refused to acknowledge them as Burmese citizens, despite some of them having lived in Burma for over 3 generations. Rohingya have been denied Burmese citizenship since the enactment of a 1982 citizenship law. The law created 3 categories of citizenship: regular citizenship, associate citizenship, and naturalized citizenship. Citizenship is given to those who belong to one of the national races, such as the Kachin, the Kaya, etc., a number of them. Associate citizenship is given to those who cannot prove their ancestors settled in Myanmar before 1823, but can prove that they have one grandparent or pre-1823 ancestor who was a citizen of another country, as well as people who applied for citizenship in 1948 and qualified them then by those laws. Is this complicated or what? Doesn't this sound like apartheid, the way it used to be in South Africa? You know, that you were white or colored or black or whatever, and people had different passports that they carried. So apparently this is true here. The Rohingyas are one of the world's most persecuted minorities. I've never heard, maybe you have, about what they've done that was so terrible. I have no idea. So more than 100,000 Rohingyas in Myanmar continue to live in camps for internally displaced persons. Rohingyas have received international attention in the wake of the 2002 Rakhine State riots and its aftermath. I don't know if I saw any Rohingyas, because I don't know if they look any different from the Burmese. So Myanmar lacks adequate infrastructure. Goods travel primarily across the Thai border, where most illegal drugs are exported, and along the Irrawaddy River. Railways are old and rudimentary, although still would be interesting to take a train, I think. Here's people working in the rice fields. In recent years, both China and India have attempted to strengthen ties with the government for economic benefit. I think the premier of China is there in Burma right now, trying to do what they do so well in China, that is build trains, build things in the country, and then put them on credit, and then when the bill comes due, the country doesn't have the money to pay them, and so they take it out in labor and other minerals and other things. I assume that's what's going on there now. You see it in Africa, and you see it in other parts of Asia and South America. Many nations, including the United States and Canada and the European Union, have imposed investment and trade sanctions on Myanmar, though the United States and European Union eased most of their sanctions in 2012 when things seemed to be getting better. Foreign investment comes primarily from China, Singapore, the Philippines, South Korea, India, and Thailand. So those are sort of neighbors. China doesn't care too much about human rights abuses, and we seem to make that an issue, and so we're sort of out of the trade loop with Burma. Myanmar continues to perform badly in the Global Environmental Performance Index, among the worst in South Asian region. Performs worst in air quality, 174th out of all the countries, health impacts of environmental issues, 143, and biodiversity and habitat, 142. So they're really at the bottom of the barrel there. Myanmar performs best in environmental impacts of fisheries. Myanmar scores very high in environmental effects of the agriculture industry because of an excellent management of the nitrogen cycle. I'm not sure what that means, but that's commendable. That's also very helpful in this country. Apparently some people find it so. And these are answer statues. 25% of the legislature is appointed by the military, and the rest elected in general elections. There's a very thin line between the military and the government. It's one of the poorest nations in Southeast Asia, suffering from decades of stagnation, mismanagement, and isolation. I think we talked about that. This is a little gift shop I found in Yangon. So this is the famous Shwedagon Pagoda, which contains Buddhist relics and dates to the 6th century. This is the second time I've been there. And the hardest part for me was you have to take your shoes off. And I found it really hard to walk around, but it's quite an amazing place. Myanmar has its definitely own unique architecture. A lot of neon is on this temple. You can see that little blue neon trim. If you've been to Cambodia and Laos, the architecture is not that unique because it's similar to what they have there, which it should be. It's neighboring countries. But that's really elaborate. I heard it was gold paper wrapped around it. Before I was there during the day, it's very interesting at night. And very big. We were there about more than an hour, I would say. A number of monks' organizations that played a vital role in Myanmar's struggle for democracy have taken measures to block any humanitarian assistance to the Rohingya community. It is very strange why this happens. It was quite crowded. All these little cubby holes and statues are interesting to see. So, no shoes, no socks. Little neon there. These guys look like toughs, but they're don't know, they seem to be very interesting. A lot of these little nooks with statues of Buddha. It's a little girl, if you can see her, praying, I think. The tour group. You know, in Buddhism, these different hand movements, postures, reflect different messages, and I don't know quite what they are. Sleeping Buddha. It's about to be a big gong struck. The role of president has been largely ceremonial since the end of military rule in 2016, with Aung San Suu Kyi effectively leading the government in the role of state counselor. She's barred from taking the Burmese presidency under the military-drafted constitution, as her sons are British citizens. I guess that eliminates her chances. Her husband's British, of course. The reputation of Aung San Suu Kyi, long-term leader of the pro-democracy movement, was battered in 2017 by her government's treatment of the Muslim Rohingya community, about which she has said almost nothing. So our next stop was Bagan, but let me just read this. The 1962 coup d'etat was followed by an economic scheme called the Burmese Way to Socialism, a plan to nationalize all industries with the exception of agriculture. The catastrophic program turned Myanmar into one of the world's most impoverished countries, a lot like Mao's program. Myanmar's admittance to least developed country status by the UN in 1987 highlighted its economic bankruptcy. So there we are in the airport in Yangon, waiting for our plane to Bagan. And it's Christmas. For many years I traveled all over the world looking for a place that didn't celebrate Christmas. And my report is, there is no place. Whether anybody understands the significance of this tree or not, I don't know, but there it is. And a lot of newspapers were there. After I was there, 2 Reuters journalists were charged and imprisoned on December 2017 for violating state secrets laws when they're covering the mass exodus of the Rohingya Muslim community. It's not a situation that's easy to report about, so the press coverage is a little sparse. Well, there was a map there somewhere. This is the yellow face makeup that I was talking about. She was our guide. I love airports in strange countries, see what people are wearing and what costumes they have. This was our airline, Asian Wings Airways, which was fine. Oh, I just want to say this thing at the bottom says Elegant Gems. When we were there the second time and we stayed at this big Russian hotel, that Russian hotel comes alive once a year with a huge gem show. The people from all over the world come there because Myanmar has some important gems and gem mines. So that's a big export of the country. Here's the plane. Rohingya are not allowed to travel without official permission, are banned from owning land, and are required to sign a commitment to have no more than 2 children. As of July, I don't think that applies to anybody else. As of July 2012, the Myanmar government does not include the Rohingya minority group classified as stateless Bengali Muslims from Bangladesh. since 1982 on the government's list of more than 130 ethnic races, and therefore the government states that they have no claim to Myanmar citizenship. So this is Bagan, formerly Pagan. It's an ancient city, as you'll see, located on the Mandalay region of Myanmar, pretty far from Mandalay though. From the 9th to the 13th centuries, the city was the capital of the Pagan kingdom, the first kingdom that unified the region that would later constitute modern Myanmar. During the kingdom's height, between the 11th and 13th centuries, over 10,000 Buddhist temples, pagodas, and the remains of over 2,200 temples and pagodas were built, and the remains are still there. So you'll see some of that. This is still the airport. It's my impression that Bagan has become quite a tourist place, and that very nice hotels like the one we stayed at have developed, and it's a very interesting place to visit. Pretty strenuous to climb up and down the temple steps and to walk around from temple to temple. I didn't do all that, but it can be done. Here's some folks. They may be Buddhist monks since they're wearing orange. They may be female Buddhist monks. We got a little welcoming dance. Again, the yellow stuff on the cheeks. I don't think this is everyday dress, but we were welcomed by these people. And there's a little souvenir shop. That's advertisement for some of the tourist hotels, not that we stayed at. Pretty nice though. And balloon rides. So here's dancers that met us at the airport, and our Chinese bus. We had Chinese buses in Cuba too. There's a good export from China. This house is typical. This is not our hotel. Little outdoor restaurant. I think when she was talking about $2 meals, that's probably where you would go. Some beautiful carving that goes on here. It seemed like there was plenty of food, although the people seemed very poor and very anxious, of course, to sell us stuff. Potatoes? No. Mushrooms, maybe, yeah, and ginger in the back.
No.
There is preservation of much of the environment and ecosystems, forests, including dense tropical growth and valuable teak. In Lower Myanmar cover about 49% of the country. So that's good, they still have that. I'm sure they're being exploited though somehow. Cabbages. There were sort of truckloads of people who would follow our bus around and try to sell us stuff. I mean, I don't blame them because their stuff was nice and they needed the money. And it was cheap enough. Stuff like this. I'm not sure what she was doing there.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Lots of flowers around. And beautiful umbrellas. And these very nice little puppets.
Oh, nice.
Although I can't say we saw a puppet show, which would have been very interesting. Maybe like Indonesian puppet shows. Hard-working guy. So these people, these are the Reuters journalists that got imprisoned, and they documented a massacre, and they got a prison cell in Myanmar. So the Reuters journalist Uwa Lone was escorted by the police from a court in Yangon last month. That was a while ago. Such court visits have been a weekly ritual for him and another Reuters journalist, going on 3 months now. The two journalists who were investigating the massacre of 10 Muslim Rohingya men in Rakhine State face up to 14 years in prison under the British colonial era Secrets Act. Window washer, I guess. These are some houses and wagons and things that people were living in. Nice horse. Usual motorbike. I think they're very happy to have the tourist trade there. Books on Myanmar. This guy looked a little sinister. So they're hawking their wares. They're eager for us to buy hangings, paintings, vegetables, cloth, all sorts of things. Probably babies too. So this bus was following our bus, and the people got off and sold this, and then they get back on and follow us some more. She was a very sophisticated young lady. So here's some of the old structures that we came to see. Or pots. See the watermelon truck in the background. So the Bagan Archaeological Zone is a main attraction for the country's nascent tourist industry, which has probably been set back a lot by this whole thing with the Rohingyas. It's seen by many as equal in attraction to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. How many have you been to Angkor Wat? Okay. So, of course, Angkor Wat is in the jungle, and it's overgrown, and it's used to be sort of filled with landmines. So these are easier to see. And they're very beautiful, these temples. So don't wear short pants or don't go without socks or shoes or spaghetti blouses.
Little no sleeves.
It would be like going to any Buddhist temple that you dressed, conservatively. Or church, or mosque, for that matter. But they are unique in their architecture. A lot of good things to buy. I think I restrained myself, but I guess that's right. This was a cruise actually that we took, which stopped like 4 days in Burma. It's Azamara cruise, and they do that kind of thing. They spend a lot of time in a country. And in this cruise, we actually stayed at three different hotels in 3 different places that the cruise paid for. Well, no, not in Yangon, not in Bagan. We paid separately for that, but at least we had access to these hotels, and they did pay for the hotel in Chennai, India, and also in Singapore, which really endeared me to Azamara as a cruise ship, because you really get to see a lot more of the country and understand a lot more when you travel that way. These are puppets. You've heard of puppet governments? This is not what this is. Here's our friends following us. Sewing stuff.
Let's see, they were good someplace else.
Pretty heavy military presence, I would say. And you can see these temples are in different states of repair, and many of them are gone now, but even the remnants of them are very unusual. And different from each other, too. You can see the brickwork there. And that was a round temple, too. They're following us as well, selling things. It's a very elaborate one. This is the main attraction of Bagan, is all these ancient temples.
What do they have inside the temples?
Not much.
Nothing,
Not much,
huh?
no. Maybe an altar. Some of them look like they might be, what's the word? Stupas, and maybe graves. He's carrying a lot of grass there.
Is a stupa more than just a shape? What's a stupa?
A stupa is a Buddhist building that is sometimes a monument to people or something. It doesn't have much in it. Going back to my interest in the right to die, the first man in the world that died under a law permitting aid and dying was a Buddhist man in Australia. He died from prostate cancer. But before he died, he built a stupa to honor, not himself, but his community, I guess. That one looks like a cathedral almost.
Yeah.
Very pretty, these carriages. The head's always good for carrying things. So this picture has 3 kinds of transportation: a bike in the back, a horse, and a car, which is very typical. Lying with a reclining Buddha. So inside some of these elaborate temples are these kinds of statues and sometimes paintings. Postcard, $1. I'm trying to remember if that was a hotel or what that was. I think it was. So, we had lunch in this tower, which was part of a hotel. The lunch was delicious, actually. And you could see far and wide, which gave you a very good view of all the temples that are there. The Bagan temple falls into one of two broad categories: the stupa style, solid temple, and the hollow temple. A stupa, also called a pagoda, is a massive structure, typically with a relic chamber inside. The Bagan era stupas, in turn, were the prototypes for later Burmese stupas in terms of symbolism, form, and design, building techniques, and even materials. I think this is our hotel. The Irrawaddy River's in the background. Actually, you could see it from our hotel. And there's a panorama of Bagan. Hot air balloon would have been fun to take. We didn't do that. He was our poster boy. It's quite a carving. So this is where we spent the night. It's a beautiful hotel. And we had cottages, so we stayed. That's really quite an understatement for where we stayed. It was what we stayed at was my girlfriend and I in a house. You'll see it. This is the lobby of the hotel. Christmas tree. And a night show. A very, elaborate dinner and show that didn't look quite authentic, but it was something. There it is. In English, the country is popularly known as either Burma or Myanmar. Both these names are derived from the name of the majority Burmese Bamar ethnic group, is what I said before. Myanmar is considered to be the literary form of the name of the group, while Burma is derived from Bamar, the colloquial form of the group's name. And here are these dancers. It felt a little bit phony to me, but what do I know? Somehow I didn't think the natives wore such a lot of makeup. This is our dinner. I forgot what that was, but it was very well presented and fancy. This is how it looks in the morning. This is our cottage. It's practically bigger than any house I ever lived in. Other cottages in the neighborhood. So.
Your beds or something.
Ours was the Orchid Cottage. This is our hallway.
God.
I think we had 2 bedrooms and a very nice bathroom and a living room. There's our living room. Our bathroom. I would just venture to guess this is not how the typical person in Burma lives. And Christmas showed up again. The breakfast buffet, very elaborate, very delicious. This is part of the hotel too, if I remember. So Myanmar is a country rich in jade and gems, oil, natural gas, and other mineral resources, which I think is why the Chinese like it so much. In 2013, its GDP stood at $56 billion, and per person as 200. No, that's not right. I don't know what these GDPs mean. The income gap in Myanmar is among the widest in the world, as a large proportion of the economy is controlled by supporters of the former military government. As of 2016, Myanmar ranks 145 out of 188 countries in human development, according to the Human Development Index. We've talked about the Human Development Index in response to other countries that I've talked about here, which essentially is a measure, which is sort of hard to measure this, but of how much people can maximize their potential in a country. Their access to education, to jobs, and when it's low like this, the potential for people is pretty bad. So when you saw these people following us in the truck trying to sell things, you could understand that their avenues to better themselves were very limited. Little Christmas decoration on our door. So here's a little bit about Mandalay, which I didn't go to, but the goldsmiths did back there, and they'll show you too sometime. A city and former royal capital in northern Myanmar, on the Irrawaddy River. In its center is the restored Mandalay Palace from the Hanbang dynasty, surrounded by a moat. Mandalay Hill provides views of the city from its summit, which is attached by a covered stairway. As its foot, this pagoda houses hundreds of Buddhist relics, I think. There's Inya Lake. That's where our second hotel in 1960, whenever it was, that's where that hotel was, on Inya Lake. So it was outside of Rangoon, quite isolated, but a very pretty setting, and huge, as I said. So there is Aung San Suu Kyi with our president and our Secretary of State. She was quite a hero at that time. So that's it. That's us flying out. What, we didn't fly out.